I'm really pleased to moderate this session here, where we are going to be talking about we are listening to 3 different presentations on beyond supplements, and there's already been built a little bit of suspense on day 1, where we heard about where is the omega-3 being used today, and where we were hearing that this might change, and I think we are going to listen to 3 different presentations today, where it could potentially become big use areas going forward. We also had a presentation here which was about a new mega trend about telemedicine. I don't know about you, but I can remember those sort of dial-up modems back then, and we can see now it's a little bit ridiculous, right? But a lot of change has happened since then, and I think this change, the speed of the change is just going to continue. I'd like to see a show of hands. How many of you are actually using telemedicine? 1, 2? Well, there's a big potential for growth, right? But I think I'm actually personally motivated to try that. A little bit about my background. I'm working for MVP Solutions, and we have been working with the omega-3 industry for more or less 15 years, where we've been handling the byproducts from the omega-3 industry. We've been finding good uses for the byproducts in different application areas. And in the beginning, many of the oils were burned for energy recovery. And the industry was very busy making omega-3 byproducts, omega-3 concentrate, so they were happy about that. And in the meantime, the last 10 years or so, we've been developing applications in animal feed. And one of the presentations we're going to hear today is going to be about animal feed. So that's the one I'm personally looking forward to. But we're also going to hear about the applications in the pharma industry, which is, I think everybody expects that that's going to drive a lot of growth in the year going forward. And then there's this other trend that we have already been hearing about, the vegan consumer. And there's also a presentation that addresses that. I would like to share a little story that we have been involved with in one of the other industries that we are working with, where we're working with a vegan drinks manufacturer, and they are really seeing a lot of success. We have seen growth rates of 650% per annum in that oat drinks industry, and they are, of course, early stage, so a lot of percentage growth in the beginning is not so unusual, but it's just taking off like crazy. I have a 12-year-old daughter, and she comes to me and said, you know, Father, I'm really considering becoming a vegan. And I think there are many young people who sort of want to be engaged with this. So there's a lot of strong forces going on, and I think it's going to be interesting to hear. So we're going to have a presentation first by Adam Ismail, who's going to be talking about the pharma industry. And then we are going to hear from Dr. Mark Griffin, who's going to talk about the animal feed applications. And then the last presentation is going to be by Andres Montefeltro, who is working with the biotech and smart food applications. So that's going to be really interesting. So the first speaker is going to be Adam Ismail, and he's the kind of person where you're tempted to say no presentation is necessary, but I know there are a lot of first-timers here, so you should really know that Adam Ismail is really been 20 years in this omega-3 and nutrition industry. He is previously, until 2018, he was the managing director, or executive director of GoIT, and has been on this podium many times. And he's currently the Chief Strategy Officer of KD Pharma Group. Before that, before GoIT, he was working in Cargill, where he was commercializing their omega-3 ingredient business. So he really has a vast experience and is now working in the pharma industry. And please welcome Adam Ismail.
Thank you. And I'd like to, like many of the other speakers, share my thanks to Ellen and the whole GoEd team for their hospitality here and inviting me back. Whoever hired them was a genius. I do have to also give a thanks to a couple of Dutch guys here in the audience because they were on the GoEd board of directors when we were talking about where we should have the GoEd exchange. And they courageously stood up and said, we were crazy for wanting to put it in Amsterdam in February. We should put it in Barcelona. So thank you to those guys. You know who you are. Just a little bit of background on my presentation before I get started here. I first gave this presentation in 2012 at the GoEd Exchange, and Ellen asked me to come back and give an update because it's been 6 years and there's a lot that's happened in the omega-3 pharmaceutical industry. My perspective has changed a little bit in that time because back then, I was more of a casual observer looking at the pharmaceutical industry from the outside. I wasn't somebody who was actually active in the industry. And of course, now I work at KD, and we're one of the largest pharmaceutical API manufacturers in this space. So I have a very different, more real-world perspective, so I hope I can provide a little better insight than my 2012 presentation for those of you who saw it. But I'd like to start by talking about the R&D pipeline in the pharmaceutical industry, because back in 2012, I put up a slide with these statistics that said the active pipeline at that time had 34 omega-3 based pharmaceutical targets in the pipeline in various phases. There were 12 companies exploring this area of those 34 products. And there were, I thought at the time, this incredible diversity. There were 17 different health outcomes, distinct health outcomes that they were looking at trying to commercialize pharmaceuticals for. If you look at the active pipeline today, it's multiplied many-fold. So there are now 88 active pharmaceutical targets in the pipeline, targeting 53 different distinct health conditions. And of course, the number of companies in this area has trebled. But the interesting thing I think about it is this isn't really the whole story. There's also a lot of failures. So these numbers are not reflected in the active pipeline. These are the ones that have left the active pipeline. 66 pharmaceuticals have been abandoned because for a lot of reasons, and I'll get into that in a second. 8 companies who were actually very much proponents of the omega-3 pharmaceutical space are now out of business. They've just completely disappeared, and of course, their entire pipeline goes with them. And of course, there are 25 health outcomes that we thought omega-3 pharmaceuticals had a lot of promise for that aren't even being researched anymore. So if you add those numbers up from the last slide, there's more than 150 pharmaceutical targets that have actually been researched for omega-3s. If you look at, I think there's a lot of lessons in these failures. And so if you look at why these products have failed, I think that the common belief would be that, okay, well, if a product was going through the pharmaceutical research process and it failed, it must be because it didn't show any effect. And certainly that's a large portion of them. You can see that 43% of them never actually made it beyond animal trials. They were products that in cell cultures or in screening showed a lot of promise. And then when you actually got to the point of trying to give it as an intervention to animals or humans, or to animals, they didn't show the same benefit. And so it became risky to try to replicate that in a human trial. But what's more interesting to me is the large part of the rest of the pipeline that failed for what I would consider management or human issues. For one, you had a lot of companies that were taking kind of a shotgun portfolio approach. If you're a startup R&D pharmaceutical company, do you want to put all your eggs in one basket, or do you want to take the funding that you have and distribute it amongst a few different conditions and see if you can find which one has the best odds of success? That's kind of a standard R&D pharma model. But what it means is that you often have products that are rationalized out of the portfolio. So when Amarin is a great example because they had schizophrenia and all these other psychological drug targets in their pipeline, but then they saw the signal that the triglycerides had probably the best chance of getting to market, and they basically rationalized those other things out of their portfolio. So that happens all the time. It doesn't mean that there's no effect there. It just means that you have scarce resources when you're an R&D pharma company, and you need to focus on where you have the best chance of success. Company funding is another aspect that I think many managers would say is out of their control, but really at the end of the day, what it means is you couldn't tell a compelling story to get the funding you needed in order to actually advance through the pipeline, even though you have strong clinical data. 14% of the products that have failed have been in that bucket. And in some cases, those companies, as I mentioned, go out of business. They go bankrupt and can't continue. There are some, of course, that fail in clinical trials, but it's not nearly as many as I think people think. I think the most recent failures we've seen are Trilogy, one with the Capre drug and Epanova in the strength trials. Neither of those drugs have actually been pulled from the market or out of the pipeline. But I think those are just recent examples of where companies can fail in a clinical trial and then they end up probably not moving through the pipeline. And then there's another bucket, which is small here, but I think it's a very interesting bucket. It's that the market becomes unattractive. There are a number of examples where outside of this space, but I think you're starting to see in this space, where you have a drug and you're going through the R&D pipeline, and it's almost a race to see who can get to market fastest. But if you're not the fastest, suddenly the market dynamics change. There's cheaper products that are on the market, they perform better, or something turns generic, and so you're trying to bring an originator drug to market in a market that's really focused on generics at a much lower price, and it becomes unattractive, so they just end up canceling them. But if we look at what the pipeline looks like today, this is the distribution of all of the drug targets that I've been tracking and where they are in the research pipeline. I think there's a few interesting things here. So I'll start at the top, but autoimmune diseases. The reason I think this is interesting is because autoimmune diseases were the first recorded medical use of fish oils. Back even in the Roman era, and by the way, Barcelona has a special history there. This city was founded by the Romans in order to facilitate the trade of olive oil, fish oil, seafood products to Italy, or to Rome. So this is a very special place from that perspective. But if you look at where those products are in the pipeline, really you see them still at an early phase there. And this is something I've never really quite understood, and I believe the reason you don't see a lot more research in this condition or in these groups of conditions is because the recorded use, it goes back so far that it'd be very difficult to get a patentable drug. And so what you see there is that the chemical forms of the products that are in the pipeline there aren't triglycerides. They aren't ethyl esters generally. They're more novel forms because you can get some patent protection and intellectual property protection by focusing on these additional types of molecules. The other thing I think is interesting is if you look at these conditions, you see very quickly that cardiovascular diseases and dyslipidemia are two conditions that tend to be further down the pipeline. They tend to be further like the phase 2, phase 3 and approved drugs. And I think that's not a surprise because, of course, cardiovascular research in the omega-3 space has been ongoing for a couple of decades now, and so it's natural that those would be further along in the process. But Norman won the GOED Award last night for his role in discovering DHA in the brain, dating back to the 70s, which of course was when the cardiovascular research started. And yet, if you look at the neurological diseases, those are all very early stage in the pipeline. So I don't know what's driving that, but I think there's this vast dichotomy because everybody says omega-3s are good for the heart and good for the brain, but you see the heart drugs are very advanced in the process and the neurological drugs are not. The other thing I think is kind of interesting on this chart is if you look at what tends to move forward in the process, they tend to be ethyl ester products. I imagine that's simply a timing issue. Those were the first ones that were really starting to be researched, but for whatever reason, there are a lot more ethyl ester products at the later end of the pharma pipeline than earlier on. And by contrast, you see a lot of different colors here for representing the other chemical forms earlier in the pipeline. It's also interesting to look at the forms that have been terminated, that have left the pipeline. And here what you see is that free fatty acid products tend to fail more often than any other type of product in the pipeline. And I don't know why that is, but maybe that might have a role when we see the results of the strength trial. That might lead to some understanding of why that trial was discontinued for futility. The other color that you see represented there is orange. Those orange products are the lipid mediators, the resolvins, the protectins, the pre-resolving lipid mediators. That to me also is very interesting because those haven't made it very far. If you look at that section of the failure chart, though, if you were to dissect the failure chart to look at just those lipid mediators, what you'd find is that most of those fail not because of clinical research, it's because they actually don't even make it far enough to get to clinical research. They fail in the preclinical phase, or they fail because the companies go out of business. And I really don't quite understand that because the research there is so intriguing, and it's very interesting to see these powerful results. At the GOED Exchange 4 years ago in Tenerife, we had a really interesting speaker, Tom Van Dyke, who came and talked about the role of those lipid mediators in periodontal disease. And he presented really compelling clinical evidence. But yet that whole area hasn't even advanced since that exchange 4 years ago. So I don't know what's driving that, but I think it's really something to try to understand. This is a chart. I've looked at the drugs that have failed in the different chemical forms. For the scientists in the room, this is not statistically significant. For everybody else in the room, I still think it's interesting. If you look at the stuff that has failed the least, the stuff on the right, your left-hand side of the chart, that stuff tends to be, those are the compounds that tend to have the most oxidative stability. And the stuff on the right-hand side of the chart tends to be the stuff that oxidizes fastest. I don't know if there's any trend there or anything to look at, but I just thought that was interesting. So just it's something that stuck out to me when I was looking at the data. But I think there's another, we in the omega-3 space tend to be, I think, fairly insular. We look at omega-3s and we get tunnel vision and we don't look beyond this. The omega-3 pharma R&D pipeline has led to a lot of research in many other fatty acids. And at the end of the day, we make lipids. The processes for manufacturing lipids, the underlying use in our body is all kind of tied together the same. But for whatever reason, omega-3s have really received a lot of the focus. But the omega-3 research has actually led to research on other fatty acids in pharmaceuticals that I think is interesting to look at. So just in terms of plain fatty acid forms, where you're looking just at the triglycerides, ethyl esters, free fatty acids. There are omega-6 and branch chain fatty acid products in the pipeline. And then they're taking a lot of the companies that are in this area are taking a common approach with omega-3s where they're trying to structure the fatty acids. They're changing the molecular structure. They're conjugating other molecules with those fatty acids. And you see that with olive oil. You see that with arachidonic acid, with flaxseed oil. They're isolating and concentrating the fatty acids they want from those sources and adding other molecules in order to target specific conditions like neuropathic pain or Friedreich's ataxia or NASH, which is non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, so basically fatty liver disease. And then, of course, the lipid mediators I mentioned, where I think there's so much intriguing research that needs to get pushed further down the pipeline. That's happening. They're oxidizing these other fatty acids that are non-omega-3s and creating those same types of lipid mediators from those fatty acids and putting them in the pipeline. I haven't put company names here, but these are the names of the pharmaceuticals that are being researched right now. These are all early stage. None of these are really to the stage of clinical trials yet. But if you're interested, you can, of course, Google these compounds and find out more. If we shift from looking at the pipeline to the commercial market, this is largely GOED data and Frost & Sullivan growth rates applied to that data. And we hired a consultant, Roland Berger, to give us a little bit more insight and critical analysis into where this market would be going. And what we see is, from a volume perspective, the pharma market's been growing very slowly over the last few years, but it's really expected to take off going forward. That's largely, of course, due to the rise of Vascepa. But what's interesting to me is that there's been this massive price compression due to the generic market, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But going forward, we expect to see things recover. And I think the pharma market is going to grow to near the size in a few years of the dietary supplement market. The originators that are actually on the market today, and by originators I mean branded pharmaceuticals, up until now everybody's talked about Lovaza, Epidel, Vascepa. That's kind of what everybody's looked at. But there are more originator drugs than those, and some of them are related. Each of them has something very interesting, though, to tell, very interesting story to tell. I think Lovaza, everybody knows, it was the first blockbuster omega-3 drug exceeding $1 billion in sales. Omacor was the predecessor to Lovaza. It was marketed primarily in Europe under Omacor. But what I think is interesting about that is it was the first drug that was approved for post-heart attack treatment, but it never actually had a placebo-controlled trial to get that indication. But in Italy, it became the standard of care. Anytime you had a heart attack, you got an Omacor pill. And of course, when Lovaza tried to come to market in the US, under the Omacor name at that time, they had to do placebo-controlled trials, and they didn't get a heart attack indication. It was focused on triglyceridemia. Lotriga is a similar product in Japan, and what I think is interesting about Lotriga is it showed for the first time that you could bring a branded product to market in a market where the primary drug, Epidel, had already gone generic, and grow the market. So you're coming in with a product that's higher priced, but what they've done is they've actually brought new consumers into the market, new patients, and the Epidel market has more or less stabilized, but Lotriga continues to grow. So how they've been able to do that, I think, is very interesting. Rosumega is a fascinating product in Korea because it's a polypill. It's the first time an omega-3 has been combined with another pharmaceutical, in this case a statin drug, to provide one product something that reduces cholesterol as well as triglycerides. Epidel, everybody, I think, or at least I hear often that Omacor was the first omega-3 pharmaceutical on the market, but Epidel preceded it by more than a decade. And Epidel is a really interesting product because it's done a few things in its life cycle. One is that you can see the little seamless capsules, the little tiny beads. It was the first omega-3 pharmaceutical to go into that form, where you basically swallow a sachet of little tiny pills. And it's done very well in that format. In addition to that, it was the first product that went OTC, where you didn't need a prescription to get the product. It kind of failed in that form because it was still difficult for a Japanese consumer to get the product. You had to go interview with a pharmacist and fill out a questionnaire. But it was the first omega-3 that actually went OTC. Vascepa, everybody knows, had the largest CVD risk reduction demonstrated in people who are already being treated for cardiovascular disease. And Novotears is an interesting one that I don't hear anybody to really talk about. And in fairness, I have to say that I don't know if they actually use DHA in this product. They describe it as a plant-based long-chain omega-3 fatty acid, which I assume is DHA, but I've also heard a lot of people describe ALA as a long-chain omega-3, so it may not be an actual DHA product. But what's interesting about it is they're pursuing pharmaceutical approval, but they've already been approved as a medical device. And so it's on the market in a number of countries as a medical device. And it's a product for dry eye disease where they've conjugated one existing dry eye drug to a fatty acid. And of course, I think everybody's focused and fascinated by Amarin right now and what's going on. The CEO of Amarin said at the JP Morgan healthcare conference a couple of weeks ago that they're not there yet, but they're working to be able to grow this product to $5 billion in sales. And right now, they're projecting that this year, in 2020, they're almost going to double the size of the market for this product to $700 million. And of course, that's right now, they're just in the US. They've just been approved in Canada. They have an approval in the Middle East, and they're in the process of being approved in China. So just from geographic expansion alone, they should be able to grow this product significantly, let alone trying to convince the doctors that there's something really special about this product. But because of everybody's focused on what's happening with Vascepa and how fast it's growing, there's a lot of question around which originator drug is going to be the next one to hit the market. And I think there's a few options. I've looked at the pipeline, and I think Epanova is an option. Even though the strength trial failed, they're actually already approved for hypertriglyceridemia reduction, but it never actually got marketed for that condition. So AstraZeneca said in after the trial failed, they said, we're still looking at strategic options, which means they may license it out to somebody. And there's potentially some extra life behind this drug. So if they find a partner for this, that could be the next one. The Capray drug that failed in the Trilogy 1 trial actually still has a second trial that's supposed to come out in the next 2 weeks, Trilogy 2, that could support hypertriglyceridemia reduction. So if that trial shows positive results, that could come to market. We actually have a product called Alpha, which is for a type of colon cancer, familial adenomatous polyposis. And it's in phase 3 clinical trials that'll end this year. And the phase 2 results were really positive. But it's an EPA-free fatty acid and would be one of the first free fatty acids that actually makes it to market if the clinical trials are positive. In China, there's actually a number of drugs that are in the approval process. They've been sitting technically approved, but the Chinese government, before they issued a marketing authorization, wants to see a lot more data in Chinese populations. So all these companies are actually in clinical trials to generate that data, and then they should come to market probably all around the same time. And of course, Catabasis has a product for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. That's a product that is in phase 3 trials right now, but a lot of trials in DMD have actually been successful in phase 2 and then failed in phase 3. So we'll see if they're going to be successful. Lastly, I want to look at the generic market for a second. In the generic market is interesting because I think this chart says it all. This is what happens to pharmaceuticals when generics come into the market. The sales of originator product just collapse instantly. The generic market for omega-3s on a global basis, you saw a little bit of a bump in growth from 2014 to 2015 as different markets shifted to generic, but this is, of course, all Omicor, Lavazza types of products and Epidel. But you can see it's a pretty stable market. It's a market that once a market turns generic, the volume shifts very quickly to these generic products because they're more economical for insurance companies to cover. And so, it's not, I wouldn't say, a hugely exciting business. But one thing that for omega-3 companies that's interesting is that, the API, the companies who are big in generics, they don't make omega-3s themselves. And so they're using the same supply chain that dietary supplement companies are using, that other omega-3 pharmaceutical companies are using. So, the name of the game in generics is, can you get in early enough to make a lot of money before the prices come way down? The omega-3 derivatives, the lipid mediators, I think are important to keep in mind and watch going forward. For us as an omega-3 industry, they're a little different than just producing a standard ethyl ester product. The ones that are in the pharmaceutical pipeline aren't necessarily made the same way. There's two common approaches you can see. So one is you can actually take an EPA or DHA molecule and specifically try to oxidize them in order to produce these lipid mediators. And there's one pharmaceutical pathway that way. You can also chemically synthesize the molecules, and when you talk to a lot of these pharmaceutical companies as an omega-3 supplier or an omega-3 company, a lot of them will say, I think what you're doing is interesting, and the research that your industry has sponsored and founded has helped our company, but we don't need you because we're just chemically synthesizing these in a lab, and so we don't need your product. So it'll be interesting to watch what happens with this because it has the potential to take away demand from actual omega-3 based compounds because these are so much more biologically potent. And maybe they use a completely alternative supply chain. And then lastly, I just want to close with one other thought about the pharma market. Obviously, the pharma market is really big. It's growing very fast because of Vascepa right now. But it's not for the faint of heart. It's a very difficult market to compete in. And this is something where my perspective has definitely changed from when I was at GoEd and now in my new role. It's an amazingly fast-growing market, but it's not fast-moving. If you want to do anything, whether you're making a small little change or you're bringing a new supplier in or whatever, it takes months to years in order to make those small changes in the pharma process. And so aside from the fact that it can take a decade or more just to bring a product to market, once you're in market, little changes take a very long time. So it's very difficult to compete in that market if you don't have other business supporting your business model. EPA and DHA, I think, are what everybody focuses on as the valuable target components in these products, but whatever else is in the product is equally important, whether it's an impurity or a conjugated molecule, and that also creates a lot of difficulties because you're not just trying to maximize the amount of omega-3 in the product, you're trying to also meet a spec for everything else in the product. And then lastly, the pharma market really likes purified compounds. And what that means, if you're going to do a pure DHA or a pure EPA product, it requires a lot of technology and a lot of capital in order to get there. So you've really got to know what you're doing. It's not something you can just come in and use a molecular distillation column to make a pure DHA product at a commercial scale. It's really much, much more difficult than that. So that's basically what I've learned from the market and where we are today. I think the pharma market has a lot of future to it. It's got a lot of legs. It's like the omega-3 research. I always said we're only at the beginning there. We're only at the beginning of the pharmaceutical market. Thank you. And my slide here says questions, but I think we're taking questions after the end of the panel. So I'll see you in a few minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much to Adam for this very good overview of where we are with the pharma industry. A lot of things in the pipeline, very exciting, a lot of details, and a very good overview. Thank you very much to Adam. Now we're going to talk about the animal feed market. And in terms of volume, that is already a bigger market than the omega-3 concentrates. So we're going to listen to Dr. Mark Griffin, who until 2018 worked for Omega Protein, where he was president of the animal nutrition division. He started in the company as a vice president of R&D in 2009. And before Omega Protein, he was working with Purina Mills, which was an animal feed manufacturer, and there he was working as a nutritionist and served in R&D and technical service roles. So Dr. Mark Griffin is now retired from Omega Protein and working as a consultant, and then he's also serving as a consultant in animal nutrition and on the board of directors of the Zoo and Wildlife Nutrition Foundation. So a very good background for talking to us today. Please welcome Dr. Mark Griffin.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. Thank you to the GoEd team for inviting me. I have a lot to cover, so I'm going to fly over this pretty quickly. But I'll be here the rest of the day. If anyone wants to talk about anything in more detail, I'm happy to talk. I started off my career as a nutritionist at Purina. That was America's oldest and largest animal nutrition company. I was one of 60 PhD nutritionists there, and I ended up being in charge of the zoo and aquaculture business groups there. Then I went to Omega Protein, which is the largest fish oil producer in North America, and depending on yields and catch, sometimes the largest producer in the world. So I spent my last 10 years in corporate life moving a lot of fish oil, tens of thousands of tons, and primarily they went to two places, salmon and dog. Okay, so fish oil supplies most of the EPA and DHA on the market. This is a graph showing you where it comes from. In rough numbers, we produce as a global fish oil somewhere between, say, 700,000 tons and 1 million tons a year. A good average is probably 900,000 tons a year. If you look at it on an EPA and DHA basis, it's about 175,000 tons. And if you look at the very top under 220, you'll see there's about a 15,000 ton chunk on there. And that's algae-based omega-3. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. That's important. It's needed. We need more EPA and DHA. Okay, so where does the world fish oil get consumed? Well, here's the bottom line. The people in this audience right here, you're using about a quarter of it total. It's going into supplements and pharma. And then basically the rest, 3/4, is going into animal. Now, aquaculture is kind of tricky. It's going into animal, but it's really just a laundering method for EPA and DHA to get it into humans. So it's indirect human nutrition. And pet, the other major user, is, of course, feeding those other members of our family, our dogs and cats. I'm only going to talk about dogs because it's the largest of the two. So let's take a look back in time. The green line is rapeseed oil. These are prices. And the blue lines are fish oil. I started in this industry in 2009, and you can find that easily on this graph because just look at the lowest point. The lowest point is where I started, and everyone was saying, we've never made money in fish oil. This is terrible. We're selling at a discount to the vegetable oils. And I kept thinking, well, this is crazy. We're so close to running out of it. And the salmon producers have been using less and less fish oil because they saw this coming, of course. Well, finally in 2011, we did run out of EPA and DHA. The prices decoupled, and they've stayed decoupled ever since. So this is all a way of saying all of the fish oil is now being used for EPA and DHA, and it's being sold and bought on that basis. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about salmon, but now I'm retired. I'm a consumer of salmon. I'm a big consumer of salmon. I love the product. I eat a lot of wild-caught fish also, but if you want fresh seafood day in and day out, you can always get fresh Atlantic salmon. And this was the couple days I worked on these slides about 6 weeks ago. This is what my wife brought home from the market. We had a salmon fillet for one night, and I always take a little bit, we can eat about half that fillet. I take the other half and I smoke it for my breakfast. We had salmon burgers, which make a great lunch for me when I come in off the ranch, and then some more smoked salmon because that's almost what I eat every day for breakfast. So, am I unusual? I eat a lot of fish. Well, the U.S. fish consumption looks a little bit like this. The medical community has been telling us for decades, eat more fish, less red meat. It's been hammered home, and there's subplots to that, such as more unsaturated fats, less saturated fats, more omega-3s, less omega-6s. And some of the very educated consumers, as you know, even know EPA and DHA. So it all makes good sense. And long term, it's actually worked. I was born in the 60s. At that time, we were eating about 10 pounds per year per capita in the US, and now we're up to about 16 pounds per year in the US. If you combine that with the population growth of the US, you see that that's a tremendous amount of new fish that had to make it to the market. And that was only possible from aquaculture. The other thing about US fish consumption is that you'll see that it varies by age, income, and education. And in very easy terms, which is the way I think of it as fast food versus the health-conscious consumer. There's still plenty of people that don't eat fish in the US. They eat a lot of fast food, but there is another population that eats almost no fast food and is extremely health-conscious. And of course, there's a lot in between. So half of our seafood now is farm-raised. This is just a picture. I went into our local market to see what we had, and it's exactly half and half if you count them out. We had wild-caught shrimp, wild-caught crabs, some wild-caught cod, and looks like snapper there. And we even had some wild-caught frozen, wild-caught Alaska salmon. But then you also had all kinds of farm-raised product in there. But by far the majority of it were the salmonids. Beautiful Atlantic salmon fillets. There were some steelhead trout fillets I see there. And then they sell so much Atlantic salmon fillets, they even pre-package them on the side, as you can see in the picture, so it's easy for the consumer just to come and get a nice chunk of fillet for them. And this is in Texas, USA. Trust me, people didn't grow up eating salmon in Texas. So, what are those salmon consuming? Well, let's just talk about Norway because it's the biggest. For salmon diets this year in Norway, they're going to use about 600,000 tons of oil to go into the feed to be fed to the salmon so that we can eat the salmon. Of that 600, or just shy of 600,000 tons, just shy of 200,000 tons of that will be fish oil. So, very rough numbers here. 1/3 of the oil that's going into salmon is fish oil. 2/3 of the oil going into salmon is rapeseed oil or vegetable oil. And that does, of course, have some implications. This is going back and looking at 20 years of reducing fish meal and fish oil in salmon feeds. The green circles are fish oil, the blue squares are fish meal. It's the same basic trend. Now, if you went before 1993, you would see that it kind of plateaued off at that higher level. If you go past 2013, you'll see that it kind of plateaued off at that lower level. Now, look at the red triangles. The red triangles are the omega-3 to omega-6 ratio. By the time we had gotten to 2004, the omega-3-6 ratio was down to 4, and by 2013, it was down to 1. And it's still at about 1. If you look at the orange diamond up there just north of 10, that's a wild-caught salmon. And I've done hundreds of these. They range from 10 to 12 usually. So we started with a salmon that was 10 to 12. We're down to 1 on the omega-3 to 6 ratio. I would take a step back. That's still a lot better than U.S. raised chickens or pork. I mean, those have a tremendous amount of 6 and almost no 3. But it's 1-to-1 now. So it's long been known that the value of farm-raised fish comes from feeding them fish meal and fish oil. And there's a lot of publications out there. This is one good one that goes over several of the issues. How does that affect us, the consumer, the humans? Well, this was a neat trial. They took 3 different treatments of salmon. One of the salmon were fed diets that the oil component was 100% fish oil. Another was 50-50, fish oil and rapeseed oil. And then the third was 100% rapeseed oil. They fed it to CHD patients for 6 weeks and took before and after measurements. Patients' serum fatty acid profiles directly mirrored their corresponding salmon fillets that they ate, and the fish oil group at the end of 6 weeks had significantly greater serum omega-3s and 3-to-6 ratio, and significant reduction in serum triglycerides. So this is just showing once again that in terms of fatty acids, you are what you eat, and salmon are what salmon eat. So the educated salmon consumer, they're very interested in health. They want long-chain omega-3s. Many of them know EPA and DHA by name. But there is a lot of confusion out there in the marketplace, and I deal with these questions all the time when I'm out at dinner with friends. They know my background, and they ask me about these things. And they all have answers, and the good news is they're all pretty good answers. But I'll only go through one of them in any detail. But the questions are things like the safety, the environmental impact of salmon production. But a big one has been the sustainability. And this really became a firestorm when the concept of fish in, fish out came in. And it had been reported that the fish in, fish out ratio was 4.7 to 1 for salmon. And what that meant was it took 4.7 units of wild-caught fish to produce 1 unit of salmon. And this was widely spread by the media, and it was always, it should be much lower. It's grossly inefficient, all these things. And so it was a lot of bad press. Not to mind that in the wild, a salmon has a fish in, fish out of well over 10 to 1. So they were, even if it was 4.7 to 1, it was at least twice as good as Mother Nature was doing. But no one told that part of the story. What was even worse was some retailers picked up on this, and they used it to show their commitment to sustainability. I'm all for sustainability. And some even went the next step, and they mandated a decrease. And that I had a lot of trouble with. So in summation, the educated salmon consumer, they're eating this for the nutrition, but they're not getting the nutrition they believe they're getting oftentimes. They think they're eating marine oil. They're eating 1/3 marine oil, 2/3 vegetable oil. So we did try to clarify the fish in, fish out. And many people did this, but this was my attempt at doing so. And what we basically tried to do is go through case by case and point out the flaws in the thinking. First of all, by decreasing fish in, fish out, just for the sake of doing it, you're going to have less long-chain omega-3s and more omega-6s in a product that is being consumed for the omega-3s. So you're not doing the consumer any favors here. We also recalculated the fish in, fish out several different ways, but in the bottom line is we demonstrated that the fish in, fish out is far less than 4.7 to 1. In fact, it is now less than 1 to 1, and it remains less than 1 to 1. Another thing about sustainability is a mandated decrease in fish in, fish out does not do anything to protect the resources. These resources were being used before the salmon industry took off. They'll be used if the salmon industry decides not to use fish oil. What determines the production of fish oil is the regulations and the fishing success and the yield, those 3 things. The pig and chicken industry can easily use all these products and will use all these products. They're just not obligate users. The salmon producers are, and so they'll pay a little bit more for them, and therefore they're using it all. It's as simple as that. But what's good is we already talked about with that graph on price is that this is actually a good thing that they're using that they're using fish in salmon production because it's being used for human nutrition. It's used for omega-3 nutrition. That's what we want. We don't want to just be wasting it using it for paint or leather tanning, all these things that fish oil used to go to. So that was our counter argument. What we truly need is the additional supply of EPA and DHA in the market. And this was a Reuters publication from 3 years ago. And I had the author was a great guy. I talked to him at length. He was well-intentioned. But as soon as I read the title, I said, oh no, I wish you would have run that by me. Grain traders prepping fish oil substitutes for aquaculture health fads. Well, two big problems in the title itself. First of all, I didn't like the word substitutes at all. What we need is additional supply. We don't need to substitute fish oil. We need something else in plus fish oil. And I certainly don't think of omega-3 fatty acids as health fads. They're here to stay. Omega-3 fatty acids are required nutrients for salmon. If you're going to grow salmon, you've got to feed them omega-3s, period. So that was that. However, he did get a quote in from me that I appreciated, and it was quite accurate. And that quote was, "We have finite fish oil, growing aquaculture, and a world that needs more omega-3s. They're going to have to come from somewhere else." And that is to say, we can't produce more fish oil just because there's market demand. We're catching and making all the fish oil that we can do and keep our resources sustainable. Okay, alternative sources of EPA and DHA. I borrowed this slide from the IFO conference a couple months ago, and basically it was just showing that these new sources were coming online. Algal sources, there's some GMO sources, all welcome in my side of the world. I think we need more and more of it, and so I'm really glad to hear this. And also that there had been a winner for the F3 Fish Oil Challenge. And the really, I think, great take-home message of this was that major salmon producers and retailers have committed to trying more algal-fed salmon. The problem with the F3 Challenge was I went to the F3 Challenge website to see what exactly that was. It's the future of fish feed. That's wonderful. But then it says that we need alternative aquaculture feed ingredients to replace wild-caught fish. Reliance on wild-caught fish is unsustainable since their populations are declining. Well, the Gulf Menhaden fishery is one that I'm very familiar with, and it produces tens of thousands of tons of fish oil a year, and almost all of it goes to the salmon industry. Well, guess what? It's MSC certified. It's very sustainable. So that's way too broad of a statement. And once again, I think we're misleading the public when we tell people we need to replace things. We need additional omega-3s. So I was looking through the last few months, seeing if anyone else was out there preaching the gospel. And sure enough, I came across this quote from the good professor at the University of Sterling. And he said it better than I could, so I thought I'd just quote him to finish off. And the quote was, "But for me, algal, EPA and DHA should be a substitute for vegetable oil and feed, not fish oil. Because what is the aim? The aim is to maintain EPA and DHA levels in farm fish. We should be returning to EPA and DHA levels 15 to 20 years ago in farm salmon. We're not getting enough in our diet." So like I said, he said it better than I could, and we'll let his word stand. Now let's talk a little bit about pet food. Pet food is the other major user in global fish oil. A little bit about the market itself. In the US, it's $25 to $30 billion business, about $100 billion worldwide. There's hundreds of participants, many locals and regional players, but also the huge international players are in it. Mars, Nestle's, General Mills, just to name three. But my number one rule of pet food is just always remember, pets are part of the family. A pet's eating habit is going to mirror the family's eating habits. It's that simple. So there's fast food pets and there's health-conscious pets, is what that's going to mean. So because they're part of the family, pet food and supplement trends mirror human nutrition trends. And just a few examples. Chicken has taken off. We're eating 3 times the amount of chicken that we ate in the 60s. And not surprisingly, fresh chicken is now a very common base for dog food. Grain-free products are now common. This takes after the paleo or the keto diets for humans. Non-traditional meats are now more common, things like deer or buffalo. Even vegetarian vegan. It's a small subset, but it's out there and it's real. And if they're good quality vegetarian or vegan products, they certainly should contain algal, long-chain omega-3s. And the latest that I've seen just in the last couple months in the USA is CBD oil in both food and treats. So for our standard, or for our purposes though, is you should know fish-based products are now commonplace. And they're here to stay. There's a lot of people that are feeding nothing but fish-based products to their dogs, and they truly believe in them, just like they believe in eating fish for their family. So to sum all this up, if you know or have a good idea what the next human nutrition trend is going to be, you've got a pretty good hint of what the next pet food nutrition trend is going to be. So this is called the NRC. That's what a nutritionist would refer to this. Grab me the NRC off the shelf. And it's usually considered the authoritative reference on animal nutrition. There's one for pigs, there's one for horses, et cetera. And this one is for dogs and cats. This one was first published in 2006. It's been republished a couple times. It's put together by the US government, but it's written by committees of very well-respected animal nutritionists. And what this does is, if you're a reputable dog food manufacturer, you should make sure your products are meeting the standards laid out in this document. And virtually all of them do that, and it's a very important document. In terms of EPA and DHA in the USA, it turns out that pet nutrition might be ahead of human. And that was because way back in 2006, when you opened this document, you looked at the tables, you found that EPA and DHA, they listed both adequate intakes and recommended allowances for EPA and DHA. What that meant is that made all the reputable pet food manufacturers in the USA obligate users of fish oil or EPA and DHA. If you're going to make a diet that meets these standards, you better have EPA and DHA in those products. So, what about supplements and other things for dogs, or just feeding fish oil in general? Well, the internet's loaded with it. This happens to be from the AKC website, which is the American Kennel Club. As you can see, it's been around for 135 years. And this is a group of big-time dog people, dog breeders and things like this. And they're selling the product for you guys. That says right in there, fish oil is good, helps support dogs' hearts, joints, coats, skin, immune system. And then it talks specifically about DHA and proper brain development, eye development, et cetera. So there's no shortage of information out there for the real dog super enthusiast to really get an understanding of how important fish oil is for their dogs. And I think it's definitely here to stay. I just thought I should Google and see what was the latest on here. I Googled fish oil for dogs, and as you can see, up come some products. Probably some of these products are represented here in this room, but there were pages and pages. Don't blame me. This is what Google put up on the first page. I scrolled through it, though, and it was there's hundreds of these products out there. So there's certainly plenty of products that are being marketed specifically to pets. So what's in my garage? Well, I already showed you what we eat in my family. And so I just thought, well, I'll go out to the garage and see what my wife had bought for our dog. And I looked and I thought, well, this is kind of interesting. Everything that's on the back of this label are things that you would think about, or most of it anyway, comes from human nutrition. I mean, it talks about antioxidants, Everyone, all the health-conscious consumer knows about antioxidants. Talks about chondroitin, probiotics, no corn, no wheat, no soy. I mean, all of them. But right there at the very, very top, it's the salmon and potato formula for adult dogs. Real salmon is the #1 ingredient. And it's good for my family, and so I'm sure it should be good for my dogs. And it is. My dogs look good. Now, unfortunately, I've been training my dog really well, and I've explained to him, well, that salmon, the fat from that salmon, though, is really only 1/3 marine oil. It's 2/3 terrestrial oil. And so, because of that, he demands that I give him his fish oil. So with that, I thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, this was a walkthrough two of the very important areas for use of fish oil in salmon and in pet food. And one of the takeaways was that we need to take good care of the EPA and DHA. Don't waste it, because there's a need for it, and the salmons need it, and the pets want it. So one of the things that I can share with you is that when we are working with a byproduct from the omega-3 industry, and we are marketing them into the aquafeed industry, then there's a lot of attention on sustainability, documentation, and there's really a need for traceability of which fishing areas do the fish come from, and which species is it, down to different percentages. So there's also a growing need for more documentation if we want to place these oils, also the byproducts, in the best way, so that we can really get the best use of the products. So our next speaker is going to be equally exciting, and as we talked about before, this is tapping into the food revolution with the smart burger, the impossible burger. So Mr. Andres Montefeltro, he is co-founder and the CEO of Cubic Foods. It's a food tech company, and they are working on smart fat solutions for the food industry. He has a background as a CEO and founder of the biotech company Enlife Therapeutics, and he's been working in other companies as well. So he's a true entrepreneur. He comes with a biotech and pharma background. So please welcome Mr. Andres Montefeltro for this his presentation.
Okay. Good morning to everyone. Thank you, Helen and Elena, for inviting me to talk today. I will talk about Cubic Foods, a startup company. We started with Raquel, that is sitting here, a year ago, and we want to become a reference fat solution platform for food applications. We found that with all the innovation that is happening in the food sector, alternative companies working with different systems to produce protein are growing fast in the last few years, but nobody has been innovating in the fat component of food. And this is why we create Cubic Foods, and we want to bring biotech and pharma expertise to the food sectors with this company. We identify opportunities for food ingredients in essential fatty acid, vitamins, and here we talk about omega-3 type of specialty fats, and also a pressure in the sector to replace animal fats and saturated vegetal oils from food, mainly in the meat sector and plant-based growing sector. Then we address these two needs with different technologies. The first one is to use cell agriculture, using cells to produce the omega-3, the fatty acids in high concentration, in trying to be more efficient than algae oil production today. Also, there is an opportunity in microencapsulation in order to deliver the omega-3 into food in variety of food applications that today is mainly optimized for infant formula. And in a different line of products, we developed the specialty type of structured oils. We use vegetal oils and water with some structuration agents to create a semi-solid fat to replace saturated fat. It's a fat replacer. Then, along this presentation, I will give you an overview of the different technologies and which our current status of development. In order to do the omega-3, we are following a process that has been developed for culture meat, starting from stem cells and growing stem cells until certain stage, and then differentiate in the desired tissue, in our case, fat tissue. We can choose, or we can pick stem cells from different sources, different animal species. We choose duck cells because the duck has all the metabolic pathway to produce a high concentration of APA. And then for us, it's easier to switch to APA or DHA production in this cell type. And in order to avoid animal pain and stress, we are starting from fertilized eggs, and also we are developing our own cell line, immortalized cell line, in order to avoid any animal contact in the future. Then from the little eggs, we start embryonic stem cells, and we grow the cells in bioreactor until we generate the fatty tissue where we extract the oil. Also, we include in our approach a synthetic biology step in order to change or to have the ability to use different carbon source and to be more efficient and concentrate APA or DHA in the system. This has been used, and there is some patent around using this approach in yeast and in other fungi. But in animal cell, we will be probably the first company doing that. The process we are following is extracting the embryonic stem cells, growing in some standard wave type of incubator, like a bag, where you can grow the cells to certain density, and then we switch into perfusion reactors. And the perfusion conditions, you can increase the concentration of the stem cells 10 times more than in a bag. Then in a smaller reactor, like 2,000 liter, you have the biomass production of a 20,000 liter one. Once we are in the higher scale of stem cells, we seed specific tissue reactors. These tissue reactors are designed to host the cell that will be differentiated from a stem cell to a fat cell. And where we have the fat cell, we feed the cell and we culture the cell in a condition that produce and accumulate APA or DHA. Then we have the extraction step at the end, where and all the downstream process is cheaper and easier than algae or fungi, where you have a cell wall to destroy and a complex extraction procedure. Then here, in an animal cell, single centrifugation, decantation, the separation process is easier and cheaper. Then, in overall, we believe that will be more cost-effective, and also we can tune with more precision the APA, DHA, or maybe for pharma applications on modify lipid versions of the molecules. Other thing to consider, and also is an issue in culture meat, is how to scale up this process from 200 liter. In our case, we are choosing a strategy to, once we have a 200 liter optimized bioreactor, we will scale out by multiply the number of bioreactors. We are not thinking in having a 200,000 liter or 500,000 liter than other companies talk about in the culture meat space. We believe that animal cells need to be managed carefully in a smaller size and probably avoiding the contamination issue that will be one of the main problems in the field. Then with this scaling out process, we can build racks of 200 liter bioreactors that can help us to have production at home and distribute to the customer, but also if we have partnership with big producers of omega-3 to set up a facility on their side and have this distribution capability, reducing the carbon fingerprint that is aligned with our values of sustainability, scalability, and environmental impact. Which is the other topic important for omega-3? Something that we learned in this year, I studied the different applications, is the microencapsulation. There is two general types of microencapsulation techniques used in pharma. Pharma use microencapsulation in almost every pill in order to protect the API, and because protect from oxidation, but also because to avoid any other problem with patients at absorption level, or because of the bad flavor. In oncology products, it's very toxic, then you need to release the products in the proper place and the site of action. Then, looking at this experience, we have been working in different microencapsulation techniques in order to protect the omega-3 oils, the concentrated omega-3 oil from oxidation, and also to protect the omega-3 during the food product process, because there is some mechanical mixers that you need to survive. You need to avoid a water-soluble capsule because there is water in all the food most of the time. And also you need to survive the cooking process in some products. And when you reach the customer and you are inside the product, you need to survive the mouth conditions, the stomach acidic conditions, and release the omega-3 in the intestine where the absorption is produced. Then, in order to look at all these stages you need to survive in order to have a viable and a good product, you need to do some R&D on the microencapsulation. We tested more than 50 different formulas. We are still working in some very good prototypes. We have one version for burgers. That is the case I will talk today. And it's not easy. It's not around, and it's not easy to find. But also we have some partners to produce ton scale of this new type of capsule. Then, what are the keys to production and to sell this type of omega-3? Well, compared to culture meat or compared to other approaches, our culture media is low cost because the type of cell we are using need less metabolic nutrients and energy in general than muscle cell, then it's lower cost compared to other culture meat companies. Then we bet that the cultivated fat, the adipocyte, that is 80% or 85% fat, will be a better fat factory than algae, that is 50%. And also in the high density tissue reactors, we can grow to more than 400 grams by liter of fat, where algae in the best condition 100, 150. Then we expect to have a higher yield by reactor. Then compared to the capex you need to do in order to produce omega-3, we expect to be more efficient. And also, if we add the dimension of the synthetic biology, the animal cells, the duck cells that has been used for vaccine production, has a variety of molecular biology tools that facilitates the editing and incorporation of new genes, something that in some algae strains is not so easy. Then we believe that we have a nice platform to start. As I showed before, we are in the first year of development, and we are in the pilot phase. We are optimizing everything. And when we reach a 200-liter tissue reactor, we will confirm all these assumptions, and then we will be prepared for industrial phase scale-up. And for sure, the microencapsulation is key. We have been talking with cookie producers, meat producers over the last year and a half, and most of them try to put omega-3 in different formats in food, but they fail because of the flavor, because the microencapsulation don't fit the production process. They launch a cookie that works well in the market, but suddenly the encapsulation fails, and then all the plant become fish contaminated in some way, and they decide to discard this type of cookie. Then I believe if we work in a better microencapsulation technique, more companies will try to put omega-3 into food applications. Then, which is our value proposition? You know that today in the nutraceutical space, people take 2 pills by day for 1 gram of DHA. A medical doctor recommends a minimum dose of 250 milligrams of DHA by day. Then we try to bring the concept of putting this dose of DHA in a portion of products, in a snack portion or in a burger, as an example. In one single unit of product, 90 grams, 100 grams of products. And then our goal is to start using microencapsulated algae omega-3, 40%, 50% concentrated, in order to start easier and faster. For the culture omega-3, we are working in the company. We need to pass a novel food approval or a FAT process in the US, and we can be able to commercialize a culture omega-3 in 2 years from now. But in this case, we can microencapsulate algae omega-3, and we can go to the market in a few months. Then, if we build this case and we discuss with the food producer, we found that they are open to test this type of products. If we encapsulate an omega-3 that is almost 60 euros by kilo, that is probably very expensive for a typical ingredient in the food sector, they found that you need only 2% of these microcapsules in the food, and then the final price impact, PVP, to the end consumer is 20 cents by burger. That is totally affordable. Right now we have premium burgers that reach 14, 15 euro a kilo, and there is a big margin between the 7 to the 10 euro kilo to launch new products. Then bringing expensive omega-3 to food application is not so difficult at this point. Another part of the presentation, we will talk about the smart fat replacer. That also can be a very good omega-3 delivery mechanism in food. The smart fats we are producing following a physical process. We structure the vegetal fats with water, and by a mechanical process, we create a semi-solid fat. That is almost 100 different formulas of structured fats that for different applications, for bakery, for spreads, margarine types, cream, chocolate. But we focus and we try to develop the best smart fat for meat and plant-based products, because there is a real need there to replace animal fats and to replace saturated vegetable oil like coconut oil. And also we are working in some versions for dairy substitutes, for vegan cheese and for alternative milk. In this area, our technology generates this type of fat. You can see in the video, this is sunflower oil with water, 60% sunflower oil, 40% water. And the final product behaves as lard. Then for a meat producer, they can handle this vegetable product as a pork product. Then they don't need to change anything in the industrial process. And the beauty with this type of structured fat is that you are putting together an oil base, a water component into a protein matrix. In this case, is cattle meat, but it works very well with pork, with chicken, and also with plant-based vegetal type of protein matrix. It blends very, very well. It's integrated into the matrix. Then the oil, neither the water, remain as a different phase. And then you are not losing oil or water during the mechanical mixture, or we can see in a second, during the cooking process. That is one of the main problems in the meat sector when they add water or any other immiscible product into the matrix. Then for us, the smart fat remain integrated in the product. The product is sweeter, The product has better mouthfeel, and also is healthier in terms of fatty acid profile. And because of the oil phase and the water phase, it's great for delivery of aroma, flavors, and also omega-3. Then we are working in putting the microencapsulated omega-3 and also another technologies of stabilized omega-3 into this smart fat that is really demanded right now in the market. Which is the value in terms of fatty acid profile? Standard cattle meat burger on the left, and a new burger that is shorter in fat, is 90-10, with 10 grams of the smart fat. Produce a burger that is 23% less in total fat and 49% in saturated fat. That is a healthier product. Then the beauty of the healthy product is that it's a nice platform to add functional ingredients, omega-3, arachidonic acid, antioxidants, or any other type of value-added products. We did the same for mortadella and for other Spanish sausages. Then the smart fat support the pasteurization, the cooking, and also the curing period with bacterial fermentation in a typical Spanish sausage. Then we can bring omega-3 in snacks of mortadella as an example, or any other type of food application. And this is a new trend. We believe that if a meat product or a plant-based product uses smart fat, this creates a blend product. The blend product has two advantages. First, in a meat company that has a big tradition of pure animal production, grass-fed animals, and so on, they can open a new line of business, a new brand for the blend products, and they can use this brand to mix meat and vegetal origin or algae omega-3 as an example, because if we put algae omega-3 in meat, we are creating a blend product because it's not animal source. And a burger with this dose of DHA in microencapsulated format or inside the smart fat can replace the wild fish of the day we don't have today. Here in Spain, it's very difficult to take wild fish every day because it's not available. And in piscifactory production, you know that the omega-3 concentration is lower or almost nothing. Then this is a trend there is a study of A.T. Kearney last year where there will be a change in the meat consumers and meat products in the future, where cultured meat will take some relevance, plant-based food like Beyond Meats, also others, and also the blends, the combination of animal protein, vegetal protein, and vegetal oils will enter into the field. Then we believe that the meat sector is a sector that will evolve from natural products to ingredient-based foods, where people look at the label and choose the ingredient they want to take. And this evolution will be helpful because we can put smart fats and we can put omega-3 in different formats or different concentration inside the product to facilitate the expansion of the omega-3 consumption into the food chain. That probably is aligned with some trends we saw yesterday in the conference, where in China and in other countries, food and beverage is probably the best way to incorporate omega-3 in the future rather than pills. And this is an option. Well, this is my presentation. Any questions, probably after in the panel. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so these were all three very exciting presentations about these alternatives to the supplements. So now it's time for Q&A, and I would like the three presenters to join me on stage. And we'd like to invite, we have time for a few questions. We are running a little bit late, but we would like to give you the opportunity to...
For Adam?
Yeah.
Great talk. Question is, does the price of generic omega-3, is it really that much lower than the the native product, the originator?
Yeah, yes, it's significantly lower. And actually, the generic market works with a very interesting mechanism. It's different from country to country, but in general, there's a daily auction, essentially, where the distributors go out to the generic companies and they say, okay, give me your daily price, and they buy based on that. So there's a big incentive for companies who have inventory to drive the price down further.
Do you have an idea in the United States what the difference in price of 4 grams of a generic omega-3 versus 4 grams of Leveza is?
Off the top of my head, I don't remember that, but I do have the data, so I can follow up with you.
The second question is, what's the status of DHA ethyl esters as pharmaceuticals?
Oh yeah, there's a number of those products in the pipeline that are DHA ethyl esters for different types of conditions, and DHA-free fatty acids and other types of products. Most of those aren't in clinical trials yet. They're still in the preclinical phase.
More questions? You have one here. No, we would like you to speak in the mic, please.
Great talks, Adam. The monoglyceride forms that I saw up there, I was a little surprised. Are they endocannabinoid derivatives of 2-AG with EPA and DHA at the SN2 position of the monoglyceride?
That's a very good question. I don't know the answer to that, but the company working on that is SCF Pharma. And I actually, to be real transparent, that's the one company I couldn't really figure out where they were, if they were still active or not. Their websites changed significantly. But I believe they're in the SN2 position from previous conversations, but I'm not 100% certain about that.
Because if it is, I mean, that's you're giving a very potent. That's a horse of a different color.
Yeah, yeah.
We have time for one more question. Well, no takers. Well, then I have one for Andres. This is still a little bit early stage, but how does the smart fat affect the flavor of the food and the burgers?
Well, we did some tests with a food producer, and there is no interference. In fact, we are using sunflower oil that has no flavor at all. Then the oil component enhances the flavor of the meat or the matrix you are using. And then I think that it's a great vehicle to deliver omega-3 and other products, value-added ingredients into the food product without interference.
Thank you very much. It will be great to follow this development.
Yes.
So we will go for a break now. And Ellen asked me to tell you that for this FC Barcelona jersey raffle that we have, that the winners will be picked right after lunch. But you still have the opportunity to buy a ticket for that if you're interested in that, just outside. So we'll meet you outside for coffee.
Okay, thank you. Pleasure.